Hi! So in the last video you learned your very first notes. Hopefully that's going okay, because now we're gonna start learning the hard part. The hardest thing about violin playing is the bow. So the bow is how we make our sound on the instrument. Hopefully you kind of liked plucking the strings like we did in the last video. When we pluck the strings, it's called pizzicato, and it's a really cool effect on the violin, but it's not what we usually do. We usually have the bow to help us make a really beautiful violin sound. So go ahead and get your bow out of the case. We're gonna learn all about it. As you're getting the bow out of the case, only hold this part down here. This part of the bow is the frog. Right here is the tip of the bow. This part, the wooden part, is the stick, and right below the frog is the screw. So the screw, if you turn it one way, you'll either see the bow hair moving away from the stick or towards it. If it's moving away from the stick, then you're tightening the bow. And don't tighten the bow too much. You might notice that I usually have a bow sitting over here. You should always leave your bows in your cases, but this one's really bad and I don't use it for playing anymore. But I can use it to show you what a too tight bow looks like. I just tightened this bow so that it's too tight. You can compare, this is a bow that's at a pretty good tightness, but I think a good rule is if you find the middle of the bow, if you think that you can put your pinky between the bow hair and the stick without touching either, then your bow hair is probably a little too tight. If you can do that really easily, like in the case of the bad bow here, your bow hair is way too tight, and if you keep tightening it that much, you'll actually damage the bow. And that's why I can't use this bow anymore, because it has warped. So the shape of the stick here has actually changed, and now I can't really play with it. So never tighten the bow too much, and then when you're done playing, find the screw and you loosen it. You loosen it so that the hair is either almost touching the stick or is actually touching the stick. This relieves some of the tension on the stick, which means that it won't warp over time, and then you can keep playing with it forever. Let's go ahead and tighten it. And again, if you're unsure, just take your pinky finger and don't actually put your pinky through, but just kind of look. And if you're at the middle of the bow, if it can go between the hair and the stick without touching either, then your bow's too tight and you need to loosen it a little bit. So this bow is too tight. You can see, especially up here, that it's curving outwards. This bow is too loose. If you go to the middle, the hair is almost touching the stick. This is maybe the amount of looseness you're going to want when you put your bow in your case, but you're not going to be able to play with a bow like this. And this bow is probably a pretty good tightness for playing. If we find the middle of the bow and use the pinky test, I think my pinky would just barely touch the hair. So it's looking pretty good. Before you can actually make a sound with your bow, you need to rosin the bow hair. So the purpose of rosin is to help the hair grip the string. The bow basically pulls the sound out of the violin, and if there's no rosin, the bow can't latch onto anything and it won't make a sound. So there's so many different kinds of rosin that you can get, but just grab whichever one you have. I'll use this one, and grab your bow, which is at a good amount of tightness. Put your bow on the rosin and start scrubbing your bow across the rosin. Be sure to get the very frog here and the very tip. If your bow doesn't have enough rosin, when you try to put it across the strings, it'll skid or not make a sound, and that just means you need more. You can't really harm your bow by over rosining it, but if you do put too much rosin on your bow, you need a cleaning cloth. This is just kind of a soft fabric. I know people who use old bed sheets and shirts. It really just has to be something clean, and if you put too much rosin on your bow when you play, a lot of rosin will be coming off of your bow and you'll need to clean it with a cleaning cloth. I mentioned in a previous lesson that you should not touch your bow hair. That's because you have oils on your fingers. I can show you, if you look right there, you see how that part of the bow hair is kind of darker than the rest of it? That's because that's where my thumb touches when I play, and there's oils on my thumb. When you get oil on the bow hair, rosin can't grip onto it anymore, and you can't use that part of your bow anymore. So if I try to play at the very, very frog, it actually won't make a sound. So don't touch your bow hair, and your bow hair will last longer. When you're done using the bow, you might want to wipe the stick, kind of like this, to get the rosin off of the stick, and then loosen your bow and put it away safely in its case. So that's your introduction to the bow. Now we only need to learn one more thing before we can start using it, and that's how to hold it. And we'll cover that in the next lesson. See you then.